the CFX Connection, my Cumulative Effects Insider's report for what's been coming across my desk this past week. I'm Barry J. Wilson. Now, one thing I'm reading a lot about is the increase in global energy demand and most importantly, electricity, right? Obviously, with e-vehicles, AI, growing populations, we have an ever increasing demand for electricity. And it's expected that the wind energy sector is going to supply or meet a lot of that demand. Where and when those new wind energy projects are going to be developed, installed, expanded, isn't certain. But what is clear is that all of the decisions around that are being significantly influenced by political mandates of governments around the world. And they're shifting their policy framework on approving energy projects quickly. Now, it's been my experience that either changing laws or creating new ones and then implementing them, that takes a long time. But policy can shift overnight. It can be implemented with merely a press release. And we've been seeing that happen. Now, as a practitioner looking at impact assessment, and especially cumulative impact assessment, we have to deal with this uncertainty all the time of not knowing exactly where things are going to be into the future. And I discuss this quite a bit with my Ravenwater Learning Circle students about how do we anticipate or account for the uncertainty around a shifting regulatory framework. Lots of things are changing, not only the regulatory, but also the market demand and technology and the way that energy is getting captured and delivered to market. This is one area where scenario planning can really shine. Okay, let me give you an example. In impact assessment, if you only have one scenario where you say, this is what's going to happen into the future, chances are that thing's going to have a half-life of a few months, maybe even a week, because everything is changing all the time. It's the one thing that is certain is that change is always happening. And so what we need to be able to do is understand how those potential changes could influence our key performance metrics across the board, because there is uncertainty. And then to be able to translate that level of risk around uncertainty is very important for decision makers and planners. So we as analysts need to be able to strategically cover our bases on what's potentially going to happen. And one of the best ways that I know of doing that is to utilize sensitivity analysis, where we test alternative trajectories against our key performance measures or indicators and see how they respond. What we find is that some metrics will be insensitive. It doesn't really matter. We can shift, let's say, a rate of development up or down, and those measures will not change. So that tells us they're insensitive and we don't need to worry about them as much. Other measures will be highly sensitive to that uncertainty about which way it goes. So that really gives us a signal that says we need to really look into this range, do a good job of quantifying the potential shifts that would happen under those situations, the different probabilities, and then be able to communicate that effectively and concisely to decision makers and planners. Okay. And this is where I also always advocate for doing our homework up front and having a holistic regional assessment for an area that covers a whole range of projects under a range of possible futures, including the potential trajectories of climate change. And the reason for this is that the one and done studies aren't going to hold water for very long. Things are just changing all the time. It's the one certainty we have is that change is always happening, right? Building a set of legacy cumulative effects tools that allows us to complete the adaptive management loop, come back, update our inputs and assumptions and learn more, and keep improving our models, that really helps us make better decisions. Now, I said something really important there, that helps us make better decisions. But models and tools like that, forecasting tools, they don't make decisions. People make those decisions. We still have to bring in human judgment because there are so many intangibles out there that are impossible to model. And so this is where the combination of having good insight and to inform decisions, but having decision makers apply judgment is so crucial. The Nobel laureate Mario Enriquez said it very well. He was one of the scientists that helped discover the hole in the ozone layer. And this is what he said. Scientists may depict the problems that will affect the environment based on available evidence, but their solution is not the responsibility of scientists, but of society as a whole. This is where it gets really tricky with this whole environmental assessment, cumulative effects, land use planning, political posturing, and decision-making. How do we decide when and where these projects are going to be? And it is a really tricky business. I'll share a quote here from Gregory et al. In 2010, who wrote a book on structured decision-making. And that is that environmental management decision-making, I'm reading this quote, in a way that is rigorous, inclusive, defensible, and transparent, requires combining analytical methods drawn from the decision sciences and applied ecology with deliberative insights from cognitive psychology, facilitation, and negotiation. So it's a very complex thing. And actually, in 2016, I published a blog on my website, which is really interesting to go look back at it now, like 8 years later. But the blog was titled "A U.S. Election, a Reminder That Nobody Has a Crystal Ball." And I was making the point about the importance of considering the political elements that influence decision-making in land use and in marine use planning, and also then significantly influence environmental assessment and cumulative effects assessments. So in that blog, and I'll put the link below, is that I mentioned that there are 5 drivers of change that we need to be considering as impact assessment practitioners. Okay, so they are the social, economic, ecological, technical or technology, and political. And maybe political is the most important. It's usually a mix of 2 or 3 of those variables that really drive the change. But the way things are going right now, political mandates are shifting policy and changing the rules of the game quickly, and almost, it seems like, on the fly. As an example, in the past few weeks, I've noticed provincial governments in Canada shifting policy on wind energy products in different directions. And those changes are swift and immediate. Okay, so not like changing laws, stuff's happening overnight. So on the one hand, British Columbia, the brand new government in British Columbia has made an announcement that they're flat out exempting all wind energy projects in the province from environmental assessments. They used to have a threshold, and I'll get to that in a minute, but not anymore. It's politically expedient to have these projects, and so they're waiving the environmental assessment requirement. Right next door in the province of Alberta, the government is banning wind turbine projects in a 70,000 square kilometer buffer zone along the Rocky Mountains in order to preserve what they call pristine viewscapes. Okay, here's 2 examples of governments making policy shifts really quickly and rapidly that are changing the game on what we're doing in environmental assessment. So this is, again, where an assessment that was done, say, a year ago is not realistic or valid anymore, given these fundamental shifts in policy direction coming from government. And on the one hand, really encouraging wind projects across the province, and then in another jurisdiction, making significant restrictions on that energy sector. Every edition of the CFX Connection, I have a wow, the word of the week. And this week, it's decide. Let me read this definition. Decide, from the Latin word decidere, which is the combination of the prefix meaning off and the word cadere, meaning to cut. And then the suffix it side is a variant of the Latin root cis, which also means to cut or to kill. So deciding is cutting off or killing any other options. So when we make these decisions, that's what we're doing. We're cutting off or killing other options. Okay, so I mentioned British Columbia exempting wind energy from, could I say, the nuisance of environmental assessment. So I want to just back up a little bit to May 31st, okay, late spring of 2024. And BC Hydro, which is the government corporation in British Columbia that is responsible for producing electricity, issued a call for power to meet an additional 3,000 gigawatt hours per year of electricity across the province. But in that notice, which I provide the link to, it was very clear that if you're planning, they were very clear. If you're planning a wind project, be aware that you'll need an environmental assessment, given some thresholds, okay? And let me read here. The bulletin pointed out that the environmental assessment process ensures that any potential environmental, economic, social, cultural, and health effects that may occur during the lifetime of a major project are thoroughly assessed. Awesome. And that there is reviewable projects regulation, which establishes that any new projects that are equal to or greater than 50 megawatt in terms of their production capacity are required to have an environmental assessment. And if they're less than 50 megawatts, there's some criteria. If it's land-based and has 15 or more turbines, needs an environmental assessment. If it's a wind generating facility with at least one turbine in water and a total of 10 turbines, then it needs an environmental assessment. If it's producing more than 15 megawatts per year, and if that's in-stream or tidal power, needs an environmental assessment. And if it's a tidal power project, always needs an environmental assessment. But now, fast forward to December of 2024, and the BC government, now just fresh after an election, decided that the EA process is not necessary when it's not in line with their political interests. So here's the statement by the minister, and this is how I come to that conclusion. So reading the quote, "It's clear that there are enormous opportunities to generate clean electricity through wind, and that we need to do more to get larger projects online faster," said Tamara Davidson, Minister of Environment and Parks. And that's why we're announcing our intention to exempt wind power projects from the environmental assessment process. The political policy perspective of wanting to get these wind projects in place quickly has led them to exempt all wind energy projects from environmental assessment and just rely on the permitting process to cover the basis. Okay, so that's going to significantly influence the growth trajectory of wind power in British Columbia. Now, they made that announcement along with an announcement for 9 new projects in the province. Okay, and all of them are exempt from the environmental assessment requirement. So remember, I said that anything over 50 megawatts under the reviewable projects regulation requires an environmental assessment. But now the shift in policy has been made so that there's these 9 projects, and I'll read them out. Boulder and Elkhart, 94 megawatts. The Brewster Wind Project, 197 megawatts. Highland Valley Wind, 197 megawatts. K2 Wind, 160 megawatts. Mount Mabel, 143 megawatts. Nils Ikoner, 140 megawatts. Niti Mountain, 200 megawatts. Stewart Creek, 200 megawatts. Taylor, 200 megawatts. So who saw that coming? All of these wind projects way beyond the 50 megawatt threshold, no longer needing environmental assessment. And it was done in the form of a press release. Okay. And here's a quote that comes with it. BC Natural Resource Ministries and agencies have been preparing to support the required regulatory pathway for these independent power projects since the call for power was issued earlier this year. So this was happening through the summer. They were getting ready within government. They just weren't really announcing it. And I do think it's interesting that, as far as I can tell, this never came up in the election campaign, which was a bit of a surprise to me. But it's a good example of how policy can shift almost overnight and change the direction of an entire energy sector's development trajectory. On the other hand, in the adjacent province of Alberta, restrictions are being applied to where new wind projects can be in order to preserve pristine viewscapes along the Rocky Mountains. And there are also some specific requirements for solar, but I'm not going to get into that in this because I'm talking about wind. But the Alberta government announced by releasing a map, is how they did it, that there are new regulations coming into force January 1st that will prohibit new wind projects within a 70,000 square kilometer buffer along the Rocky Mountains. And in the press release and in a Canadian press article by Lisa Johnson and Jack Farrell, they said that Alberta Utilities Minister Nathan Neudorf said, by conserving our environment, agricultural lands, and beautiful viewscapes, our government is protecting and balancing Alberta's long-term economic prosperity. Our government will not apologize for putting Albertans ahead of corporate interests. So I think what he was talking about is that the restrictions are definitely going to impact the wind energy sector in the province of Alberta, but they've made a policy shift to exclude within this particular area in order to preserve another value. Okay, there we see the performance metric viewscapes being very high. And who saw that one coming? What do you think? What's your take on the political influence and shifting policies, either in Canada or around the world, how they're quickly changing, particularly with respect to wind energy as we try to meet the increasing demand for global electricity supply? What are your thoughts? Do you have some specific recommendations you think that people should be doing? Share your thoughts here with me. I'd love to be able to read that, and then everybody else also. I'm Barry J. Wilson. Remember, everything is connected.